Having secured absolute power, Stalin began transforming the Soviet Union into a modern superpower. In 1931, he would state, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it or we shall be crushed." He would begin a policy of rapid industrialization, launching a series of 5-year plans to grow Soviet industry. But the implementation of these plans would be chaos. Ignoring the advice of economic experts, Stalin would double and then triple production targets, nearly none of which would actually be met. Inflation was rampant, money was spent with no budget, and entire factories were constructed with only half-finished blueprints. But despite this, production did see a notable increase, securing the Soviet Union's place as a modern industrial nation. To support industry, a policy of forced collectivization was implemented, where peasants, the country's largest group of people, were stripped of their private property and forced to work for the state on collective farms. Anyone who refused was beaten, shot, or sent to labor camps known as gulags, where they would be used for slave labor. But the policy would be met with extreme resistance, with many peasants preferring to burn their crops and slaughter their animals rather than let them be taken by the state. In some instances, Stalin's response was extreme, with villages that refused to comply being bombed out of existence by the Air Force. With the peasants lacking any economic incentive to work, agricultural production saw a massive decline, soon leading to a devastating famine. Reaching its peak in the winter of 1932 and 1933, the famine is estimated to have caused the death of up to 7 million people, with millions more being left permanently disabled. Parents would sell their children for food, with the countryside seeing widespread cases of disease, banditry, and cannibalism. Anyone who kept stores of grain was accused of hoarding, and were beaten and tortured until they gave up their supplies. The famine would hit Ukraine the hardest, with 3.5 million people dying there alone. The Ukrainians would call the famine the Holodomor, a name that means murder through starvation. Stalin would only make things worse, exporting 2 million tons of food out of the Ukraine and forbidding those that lived there to move away. Their only option was to wait and die, with thousands of starving people turning to cannibalism to survive. But for Stalin, the countryside had been brought under control. Although it had cost the lives of millions and had reduced the peasants to slaves of the state, it was a price he was willing to pay to feed the industrial workers. But as the 1930s went on, Stalin would become increasingly paranoid of those around him, constantly searching for traitors and conspiracies and looking for ways to secure his power. He would first target his political opposition with the assassination of Soviet politician Sergei Kirov, providing a pretext for convicting his most influential opponents of conspiracy. Between 1936 and 1938, a series of show trials would be held, where the accused would be convicted on fabricated evidence, tortured into giving a confession, and then shot. The old Bolsheviks were targeted, those who had been around since before the revolution and retained strong political opinions and influence. They would be replaced by young politicians who could be easily manipulated and were completely loyal to Stalin, knowing never to question his judgment. Army officers soon came into the firing line, as Stalin believed their power and influence had grown too strong. Many were convicted of working as agents for Trotsky, with over 35,000 officers being shot or imprisoned, and the Navy losing every single one of its admirals. But soon the purges would extend to every corner of Soviet society. Ordinary citizens were encouraged to report suspicious friends and family to the authorities, many of whom would do so out of fear of being targeted themselves. The secret police were also appointed a new leader, Nikolai Yezhov, who would set his officers' arrest and execution quotas, often purging his own staff to impress Stalin. At only 5 feet tall, he was soon nicknamed the Bloody Dwarf, due to his enthusiasm for torturing his victims. Between 1937 and 1938, an average of 1,500 people were killed every day, a period known as the Great Terror. Around 1.6 million people were arrested, 700,000 of which were executed, with an unknown number dying in labour camps and torture chambers. Stalin's paranoia had become extreme, with a colleague describing him as suspicious to the point of insanity. His purges would also have a devastating effect on Soviet society, with a culture of fear and distrust emerging. Those working in industry were afraid to suggest any changes or innovations that could get them accused of sabotage, leading to a slowdown in economic growth. The military were particularly affected, and would suffer from an extreme shortage of experienced commanders, with discipline and quality suffering as a result. And with war on the horizon, the purges could not have come at a worse time.